So welcome everybody. So every Thursday we try to have these kind of seminars. And today we invited Gudrun, and she will talk about LIDAR and archaeology and the importance to find the ground points in the classification. We will film this seminar, so if you don't want to be in the film, you can sit where you are. And we can also try to take the questions after our presentation. And then we can cut away that part from the video. So welcome, Gudrun. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I will do this in English then. And the title of the presentation, so it's LIDAR and archaeology, the importance of ground point classification. And I added an etc. too, because I'm going to talk a little about some other things as well. This is the project that I'm currently working on in my PhD project in forest history. And I'm working in the Kryptland catchment. I suppose that all of you know that there's a lot of research going on in the Kryptland catchment just outside Vindeln. This is the limit of the research area. And I searched the Swedish database, the national database of the Swedish National Heritage Board of cultural and ancient remains. And there's almost nothing registered from this area. There are some hunting pits down here, a system of hunting pits, possibly from Stone Age, and also some tar pits, kärnollar, from later times, from the industrial era. But otherwise, there's nothing registered inside this research area. And to compare with, I looked at this area. This is Östra Kikkiau, the lake Östra Kikkiau in Arvidsjaur municipality, where you can see that there are lots and lots of dots in the database. And there is no reason to think that this difference is due to any real difference in the presence of ancient remains. But here there's been a lot of research and a lot of archaeologists that have been doing research here and looking for remains, and so they found a lot of things too. But even here you can see that there are large areas that are empty. There are no finds. And is it reasonable to think that people have never been there, never used any land, and never left any remains since Stone Age into our time? Of course not. So they haven't been found. So this difference, the presence of finds reflects where our archaeologists have been looking, and also where it is easiest to find ancient remains due to vegetation and soil, etc. And archaeologists never have the time and resources to do any landscape-wide surveys and go all over the landscape in detail, because it's very time-consuming to do such inventories. This is from near Umeå in Sävarparish, Skogberget. This is near Skogberget, where they found quite a lot of things. There's a charcoal kiln in Kolbotten, a cairn from land clearing, the Röjningsröse, some Stone Age graves and settlements, and also tar pit, Kärdal. But since it's so time-consuming, the inventory has to be quite selective, and only some of the remains will be found. And if you look at this image, we'll see that there are in fact things there which are also, they're very much like this one. They're also charcoal kilns called Bottnar. There's at least 10 such that haven't been registered in this area where archaeologists have been. And someone has been even here looking at the tar pit and haven't seen, or didn't have the time to register these two. They can be very difficult to see, in fact, although they're rather large. There's a dense forest. So I think it's a large need to find better methods to find ancient remains in the boreal forest. And why is this important? I think there are at least two reasons for this. The first is that the Swedish law is in fact quite strict in these matters. Ancient monuments of a certain age are strictly protected by Swedish law, but nevertheless, even when the remains are known and registered, studies have shown that about 20% are damaged when they're during clear cutting or during soil scarification. And of course the remains that are not known are damaged to a much larger extent. So it's important to find them, to protect them. But I think there's also a scientific reason to find more, because I think it's interesting to see spatial patterns in land use. And if you can make landscape-wide inventories of certain remains, you also have the possibility to do other kinds of studies. So that's why I'm interested in this matter. And this image that I showed is in fact, this is a LIDAR, a DTM, digital terrain model. And I think that if the archaeologists would have been here today, they would have seen these remains. That was registered in 1989, but nowadays these images are easily accessible on the web, and the archaeologists use them regularly to find things. I think they would have noticed these anomalies in the picture. But usually what they have access to is this kind of image, a DTM, a digital terrain model, which is not the last, but one step in a long chain of preparations from the original data. And all along the way there are different parameters that can be influenced in order to make the image as good as possible in order to see the maximum of remains. And this is, the DTM is made from a point cloud. And this is a point cloud viewed from the side. You can see ground points down here and dense vegetation and forest trees up here. And this point cloud is gathered from the air. There are airplanes equipped with a special, I'm not going to go into the technicalities too much, but this is, they send out laser pulses that will reflect on the ground and go back to the airplane. They might reflect on vegetation, on the ground, on a lot of things. And of course what is interesting for the archaeologist is the ground. This might be a hunting pit, for example. So they don't want to see all of the vegetation. They want to keep all the ground, the green points here, and take away all the red points of the point cloud. And also, it's not always the case that the laser pulse is entirely the first contact. It might also, one part might be reflected here and another part here. So there might be a first return and a second return and even a third or fourth return coming back to the equipment. But when we are going to make, when the data is analyzed, we don't know exactly what is ground, what is vegetation. This is more or less what we see. Each point is located with latitude and longitude, and also in elevation, so it has an X, Y, and Z. But we don't know exactly what did reflect that point. And here I've colored the first returns yellow and the last returns red. But in fact we don't know exactly what points to keep if we want to make if we want only to keep the ground points, what points should we keep? And there's been some estimation based on only keeping last returns, which might be a fair estimate, but in some cases this might also be vegetation, so it's better to make a further filtering of the data. And when I started to be interested in this when I started to work with the curriculum data, and I then quickly understood that there were many different methods to classify the point cloud into ground points and other points. And all these methods have been developed for different purposes. Some people want to use the point cloud to analyze the forest structure, and other people for topography or for water flows in the landscape. And of course different methods were suitable for different purposes. And then I found that there was in fact a project in the Ludwig Boltzmann Institute in Vienna that have been evaluating different methods for classification for archaeological purposes. And you can, if you're interested, you can go in and see further about this project. And they've looked at classification software that is more or less freely available. And after having read what their results, I decided to use a software called LossTools. That's a software package with a lot of different applications and for treating laser scanning data in different ways. And for classifying ground points is the last ground new application that is used. And by default it only treats the last returns. You can change that if you want, but in principle it's only the last returns that are classified. Then there are different parameters that you can influence. The most important are the step, which should be chosen as big as the size of the biggest object located in the filtered area, and they recommend a step of 3 under wilderness conditions, and I think most boreal forests will be wilderness. I've also tried different values of the step, but I think 3 is quite good. And then the offset, which is the distance above the current or one of the first ground estimates above which further points are included into the final ground estimate. And then there is the spike, which removes needle-shaped formations that disturb the final picture. And this is run from a command line. There is also graphical user interface, but having tried this a couple of times, I find that this was just as easy to run it on the command line, and this is an example of it. And as I said, I found, after having made some trials, I found that 3 was a quite good value of the step, but then I've tried different values of the offset, and then I'm going to show a few examples of how different values of offset influences the final picture. So this is one of the known remains in the Krypton area. It's a tar pit, Kärdal, with Mount Storkludden in the background, and this is on the clear cut, and they've left these to protect and to show where the tar pit is located. And there's also a hunting pit just close to this, and a system of hunting pits running this direction. And this is a profile of the point cloud made through the tar pit and the hunting pit. Here's the tar pit and the hunting pit. And here I have used a low value of the offset, 0.01, and the green points are the ground points, and the red points are the ones that are not classified as ground points. And as you can see, it's quite good, but there are some points that should have been included in the ground points. So if I with a higher value of the offset, these points are included. So I think that will give a better picture of this in this particular case. And then I had this tar pit. It was not known before, but I saw it in the data, and then I found it in the field, and it can be very difficult to find something like this because you can't get an overview of it. You don't see the structure. It's much easier to see it in the LIDAR data than in the field, in fact. As you can see, that this is where the tar was produced, and here the vegetation is dense, so it doesn't show as well, and it's more difficult to classify the points too. The tar pit is here, and since there is a lot of vegetation, a lot of the laser pulses are reflected already here, and there's very few points on the ground. And maybe you see also that there's there are much more points over here than here. This is an area of overlap where the plane has been, flygstråk are overlapping each other. So what would be best here? I think it would be better to include at least these points so that at least the ground would show a little bit better. And this will also be the case if with a higher value of the offset. But it's not ideal in either case. And if we make a digital terrain model, a DTM of this is the tar pit and the hunting pit, and this is the other tar pit, which is covered by dense vegetation. And you can see that the difference is not huge on the clear cut. Since there is so little vegetation, it doesn't matter very much how you do the ground point classification. Here it might be a little more important, but the difference is not extremely large either. But in fact, there are also some pits up here. I don't have any photos of them because I didn't know about them when I was there, and I didn't see them in the field either. But there is a pit there. And I have two sets of data for this particular area, and I think that the big difference between, this one is from the National Survey, Lantmäteriet, and the number of points is much less than this one. But this was made earlier, and I think that the big difference is that this was made immediately after the clear cut, so that there is almost no ground vegetation, and the pit shows quite well. And this is made a little bit later with a lot of ground vegetation, and it's much more difficult to see the pit. And in this case, with the small offset, there are very few points left in the pit. Very few ground points. The larger offset, at least some more points will be included. But when I look at the DTM afterwards, I'm not quite sure which is the best solution. Maybe this is a little more distinct, but at the same time there are so many other things that are beginning to show that maybe it's even more difficult to see the pit. Here there are fewer points in the pit, but there are fewer structures around disturbing the picture. So maybe this is still a better solution for this structure. And in fact, it doesn't matter very much what I do to influence this one, because they will be seen in any case, and they will even be seen on aerial photos, and probably they will be known anyway from the beginning. And also here the difference is very small, but maybe this is what is most important when I take the decision how to classify my data. And I don't have the final answer to what is the ideal solution. I think there is no ideal solution for all cases, but I think it's important to consider these. What kind of remains do I want to find, and what kind of vegetation is there, and to try out how do I do to see them, how do they show the most clearly. So that was ground point classification is one important factor influencing the final result, but there are also, of course, many other factors. One that can be difficult to influence is the scanning season, and if you don't do the scanning yourself, which is very expensive, you have to use someone else's data. And then, for example, the Swedish National Survey, which scans all of Sweden, scans southern Sweden in spring and autumn, before or after there are leaves on the trees, because there's so many deciduous trees. And then they scan northern Sweden during the vegetation season, and because there are many conifers. And that might be reasonable for them, but for archaeological surveys it's maybe not so good, because then there will be a maximum of ground vegetation in northern Sweden, and the ground will not show very well. It would be better to do it immediately after the snow has disappeared. Then there's the DTM, Digital Terrain Model Interpolation, which also has various methods and gives various results. But that will maybe be the subject of another seminar. And finally, when you've made the DTM, you can also visualize it in many different ways, because the light or shade is extremely important for the visibility of different remains. These are the two same DTMs, but here's a tar pit which shows very much better in this with this shading. You have this characteristic outflow of tar there. And so, yeah, that was more or less what I already said, the conclusions. You have to, I think it's very important to consider, if you have the possibility to classify the ground points yourself, it's important to consider what you think you are going to find and how the vegetation will influence how you can see it, and also then try out different solutions, different parameters in the software that you choose to use to make your to classify your data. So that's it, and thank you very much for the people who financing the project, and also to Martin Isenberg of LossTools who gave me the possibility to use his software during 3 months without paying for it.